Today we're looking at something quite unusual. The R2500R comes from a German company called T+A, and the R2500R, so catchily named, it's an all-in-one box that does everything. And by everything, I mean everything. Assessing the performance of this singular but multifaceted high-end audio piece won't be easy, but we are going to do so with music that you might read about on Rolling Stone, on Pitchfork, and in Uncut.
This episode is brought to you by AudioQuest. With products to fill every need and prices to suit every budget, AudioQuest is made for you. Visit audioquest.com for more information.
But before we start, how about an electronic music compilation from the future sound of London? It's called Mind Maps 5, and it's a continuously mixed sequence of remixes done by somebody called Yage, which I think is the future sound of London under a different name. Now, some people might call this a soundscape that's heavy on the 303. Others might say it sounds like music from another world, because it does. And it really is for fans of the Black Dog or Autechre or Prome or the Orb. But there is a catch, because the Mind Map series of CDs is not on any streaming service and there's no download. Yep, this is CD only, and I got mine from the future sound of London's Bandcamp. And I've been playing this CD on the 2500 because, as well as a CD player, the 2500 is a power amp, a preamp, a DAC, a network streamer, and a balanced headphone amplifier. And it sells, I hope you're sitting down, for a cool 14,500 euros. But it even includes an FM and DAB tuner, which I didn't use. But something that I did use a fair amount is the internal phono board, which doesn't come stock. It's an optional extra at the time of ordering, and you get a choice of moving magnet or moving coil. I went with moving coil because that's what's on my turntable that I use with this unit. Now, beneath the top plate porthole sits a Class AB power amp that promises 140 watts per channel into 8 ohms. Now, hi-fi nerds will want to know that this speaker amplifier is a fully discrete design with no op amps and no global feedback. And the 2500 is a large unit but weighs only 14 kilos. Now, why is that? Well, it's because it doesn't have a honking great toroidal transformer inside the unit. So everything is juiced by a switch mode power supply and a smaller transformer, and T+A calls this a sinusoidal power supply, and I'll put links to more information about that in the show notes below. But the German company claims that this sinusoidal power supply combines the sort of sonic advantages of transformer power supplies with the stability of switch mode power supplies. The preamplifier section allows us to switch between balanced and single-ended analog inputs. And I find personally that the balanced input is essential because my main turntable, which is over here on this side of the room, sits, as you can see, some distance from the amp, which is behind me. And that's a distance that I can only really bridge with, I think it's about 5 or 6 meters of balanced cables. Nevertheless, the MC phono board inside the unit I use with a different turntable that's sat next to the 2500. Digital inputs on the back panel, number 4. There's a pair of Toslink, 1 coax, and 1 USB input. And DSD fans will need to know about that USB because no streaming service, as we know, currently offers DSD streams. So DSD tends to be more of a local file thing. And I mention this because the 2500 decodes DSD and PCM via separate circuit pathways. And on streaming, the 2500 supports Bluetooth, Spotify Connect, and Apple AirPlay 2 if you're okay with lossy streaming, and then Roon Ready and Tidal Connect for lossless. And then T+A's Navigator G3 app separately integrates Qobuz and Amazon Music. And I can confirm that all streaming functionality on the 2500 works flawlessly. And for the last few weeks, I've been using Roon. Now that means a Roon Nucleus 1 in the corner of the room. And inside that Nucleus 1 is a 4 terabyte solid state drive. And on that drive are 3 terabytes worth of FLACs. Now for music that I don't own, the Nucleus one has my Tidal login credentials so that it can stream content from there, and that is essentially my Roon server. And then I use Roon Remote when sat here on my couch to tell the server what to stream to the T+A or T+A? the T+A box, which is behind me. And the TV remote app running on an Apple TV separately pulls the now playing information from the Roon server to push it out to the TV. And I would like to thank Roon for sponsoring this video. But in case you were wondering, no, Tidal Connect streaming doesn't sound any better or any worse than Roon. And in an interesting twist, neither does Apple Music fed over HDMI. Now I'm not talking about HDMI ARC, but one of the 2500's two other HDMI inputs, because here we can connect an Apple TV directly to the T+A box for, wait for it, bit perfect playback of CD quality Apple Music streams. And so it seems to me that the T+A behaves a bit like an AV receiver. Well, almost, because T+A is still working on volume control over HDMI ARC, which is a bit frustrating, and that means we have to lean on the supplied infrared remote control to change the volume when watching TV. And despite being a bit of a dad remote, the front fascia and the buttons, they're all metal, and that remote feels very satisfying to use. Now, before we go any further, can we take a moment to appreciate the fit and finish of the unit itself? Because the brushed aluminium chassis looks and feels very classy. And T+A told me that it comes from a supplier in Germany's Black Forest. And the rotaries and the click buttons deliver knob feel that I think is well above average. And an in-house designed controller board drives the VU meters, and their background illumination is user customizable because you can change the color of the light that fires up behind those VU meters. But if you're concerned about so much going on inside one box, know that the digital and the analog sections use separate power supplies and are galvanically isolated. The CD mechanism here is a slot loader, so not really my first choice, but I can understand why when internal real estate is really tight. And during 2 months of use, the slot loader performed flawlessly. I experienced 0 unreadable discs, and the loading tension, so the way that the motor kind of pulls the CD from your hand, it's just the right side of grabby. And inside the unit, the laser system comes from Sony, I think, or maybe it's Sanyo. I think I've forgotten that one. But the mechanism that loads and spins the disc comes from a supplier in Asia. At least that's what T+A told me. But they also told me that they designed and built the controller board that controls the CD's operation. Now that controller board does a grace note lookup for cover art for the smartphone app and metadata for the VFD display, which comes from a company called Futuba. Is that how you say it? Futuba. And that VFD display shows now playing information, which I think, well, it kind of looks a bit like the Squeezebox 3's display, doesn't it? Which is no bad thing. But if you're seeing it flicker in this video, that's because the frequency of the display is, I think it's just over 100 Hertz. And it's very hard to get camera settings right to film that display without any flicker. So I'm sorry about that, but it doesn't flicker in real life. Your eyes don't see that flicker. And it's also worth noting that the song titles can absolutely be read from the listening position, which I think is a real bonus. And apparently the 2500 speaker terminals are high quality brass. And to those terminals, I connected a pair of Vivid Kaya S12. Those are the orange Baba Papa speakers that you see behind me. They are a high-end stand mount loudspeaker and a very, very good acoustic fit for this room. let us not forget that how a speaker integrates with the acoustics of the room will determine heavily what we hear. And occasionally I would add a KEF subwoofer to the Kaya S12, and I'd have to do that using the 2500's pre-amplifier outputs because there's no dedicated sub output on the unit and there's no bass management inside the unit. Now, the question burning on my mind from the very beginning of this review process actually was, how does the T+A compare to a hi-fi system built from separate components? Because we're told that separates generally in the main sound better. But what about us should take note here, because I have to work with the gear that I have here at the time of review. Obviously, I cannot include gear that I don't have. So if it's not in this video, I don't have it. But I built a system firstly with a power amp, because we need a power amp to drive our loudspeakers, and I went with the Cambridge Edge W power amp. And I chose this because I have it here, because it's a Class AB amplifier like the T+A, and it offers similar output power to the T+A. Now, adding Cambridge's Edge NQ preamp then matches the streaming and the hardwired connectivity of the 2500 almost to the letter actually. So that includes HDMI ARC, a balanced XLR analog input, and a headphone output. And make no mistake, this Cambridge pairing is a formidable sounding twofer. And to me, it really does ace the sound of the Evo 150, which I also have. But for physical formats, I added a TEAC VRDS 701 CD player and an i-Fi Zen Phono. And as covered in our TEAC video, the 701 is a fantastic sounding CD player. And then lastly, but importantly, a bunch of AudioQuest cables tied the whole system together. So that is a lot of stuff to tee up a side-by-side comparison, and it's a side-by-side comparison that I conducted over a number of weeks. I think it was about 5 weeks on and off. And I did 1 week with the T+A, and then 1 week with the separates, then another week with the T+A, and so on. You get the idea, right? And yes, all playback was level matched, and what follows is first-hand testimony of what I heard. Nothing more, nothing less. So the headphone socket on the T+A is a 4.4mm Pentacon balanced output. And that really brings the FIO FT3 to life when listening to The Cure's Love Song. And far more so than the single-ended headphone socket on the Cambridge Edge NQ. And even more than FIO's KA2 balanced dongle DAC connected to a smartphone, because that dongle DAC also has a 4.4mm Pentacon socket. Now, T+A's internal phono board sounds convincingly better than the i-Fi Zen Phono. And by better, I mean it offers better separation and more abundant micro dynamics. And in fact, I think it even edges out the €800 Pro-Ject Tube Box on overall clarity. So this tells us that T+A's internal phono board is not just a convenience feature, and that it will happily stand in for an external unit. But of course, most people want to know how the two systems compare when driving loudspeakers. So streaming Bowie's Ricochet, the separate system sounds fuller and punchier in the bass. And if these qualities are most important to you, you'll want the separates over the T+A. However, in the mid-range and the treble, the separates sound hazier and less precise with instrument placement, especially when sitting back to enjoy Bob Dylan's Lovesick. So here the T+A sounds crisper and cleaner. And that crisp clarity difference shows up again on Radiohead's A Punch Up at a Wedding. So if these two hi-fi systems were cameras fitted with the same lens, we might see the T+A as having the higher megapixel count or the larger sensor, because it captures more from the uppermost treble on Brian Eno and John Cale's glorious Spinning Away. And it's generally tighter in the bass on Alexi Pereira's unpronounceable actually track from the Midnight Sun album. Or maybe it's not tightness, maybe that bass is just leaner. But whether it's tighter or leaner, the T+A box sounds quicker on its feet with the bass than the separate system, which can sound comparatively a bit slow, yeah. And none of these findings changed when using the TEAC's internal DAC instead of the Edge NQs. And I went backwards and forwards with Thomas Dolby's Airhead CD single, paying special attention to the B-side track, Budapest by Blimp. Now, there is a purity to the sound of a T+A that we don't get from a TEAC running through the Cambridge boxes. And then back with that Future Sound of London CD, the 2500 better exposes its sort of crunchier electronic sounds. They're more accentuated, I guess. And I think the Cambridge pairing, it's a bit softer. So I would say that the 2500 gives us the extra dollop of transparency needed to access MindMaps 5's finer details, because the separate system smooths those details, albeit just a little, but delivers sort of greater bass heft. That said, any bass weight difference tended towards zero when adding a subwoofer to the system. Not everyone wanting a high-end audio system has the time or the energy to compile a separate system, because researching each component can be a full-time job. And component matching is a trial and error process, right? This is why many old school separates enthusiasts suggest using at least pre-power components from the same manufacturer. So I think the next logical step must be to put separate components from the same manufacturer into a single box, just as T+A has done here with the 2500. And that single box demands 0 interconnects and only a single power cable. So what we lose in flexibility, we gain in simplicity. And newcomers to the hi-fi world, I think, must find it super confusing when they are told to go with separates, and then in the next breath, they are also told about the importance of shorter signal paths. I mean, which is it? So what we have with T+A's R2500R is a high-end hi-fi appliance that I think is exquisitely made, and it's easy on the eye if not on the wallet. And I gotta say, it's an absolute joy to use. And if I didn't review audio gear for a living, this is what I would use to power my speakers, because it does everything we need to play music from a variety of formats and to a very high standard. And it comes, get this, with 0 audiophile fuss, because not everybody wants all that audiophile fuss and flexibility and to be able to change this and change that. Some people want a set and forget solution, and not everybody wants a super affordable set and forget solution or a basic set and forget solution. They want one that's been made to an exceptionally high standard. So I think this is that. Anyway, if you like this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to this channel. And I hope you see this review glass as 90% full and not 10% empty, because by the time this video goes out, I will already be working on the next video. Oh yeah, if you want playlists for this video and all of our other videos, hit us up on Patreon, even if it's just for a month to buy me or Olaf a cup of coffee. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching. And despite being a bit of a dad remote, the front fascia and buttons are all metal, and it feels really. And despite being a bit of a dad remote, where is it? No, it's not there.